Welcome to our 57th episode featuring the film The Dead Girl, but not really featuring me. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and yes, it's true, we have a podcasting first here where after 56 episodes of podcasting, I present to you an episode that I'm not really in. It'll get kind of personal, kind of bloggy for a moment here, so if you're anxious, skip right into the interview, but otherwise, I'll explain what went down. I did a lot of screenings and podcasts over the last year, and by the end of 2006, the rush to complete various journalistic deadlines was completely intense for me as I was trying to clear all of my magazine and podcasting duties so I'd be free in early January 2007. I, of course, did this because my wife was pregnant, and we were quite looking forward to having our son in early January of 2007, and I wanted to be free and available to help out, etc. Do you see where this story is going? As screenwriting enthusiasts, I think you'd have to. Anyhow, so what happened was this. I had one of the most intense weeks of the year in December that included 5 screenings and 4 podcasts. I figured if I could make it through that week, I'd then have the next week to finish out the year with the last screening and podcast for 2006, which of course was going to be The Dead Girl. So, I made it through our Bobby screening with no Q&A, just a traditional word-of-mouth screening with a packed house on Monday. Then our sold-out screening and podcast for The Queen on Tuesday. Next, our sold-out screening and podcast for The Pursuit of Happiness on Wednesday, where after filling the 520-seat WGA theater, we then had to turn away another 150 angry people outside, which, by the way, I hate to do because I want everyone to have access to these screenings. Then, finally, the World Trade Center screening and podcast on Thursday, and to finish out the week, a non-screening, one-on-one podcast interview with writer-director David Lynch on Saturday before his film Inland Empire's premiere. Heck of a week. Now, I'd been writing out my questions and doing research in advance so that if the wife went into early labor, I'd be prepared. I was also in the final week of scheduling articles as senior editor for our January-February 2007 issue of Creative Screenwriting Magazine, which, by the way, has Dreamgirls on the cover, so look for it at newsstands now or at Barnes & Nobles and Borders bookshops. Anyhow, I miraculously made it through that hectic week and was quite pleased with how everything went, knowing that my wife was ready to give birth in early January, we couldn't travel anywhere for the holidays, so I had plans to podcast 2 episodes a week in those last weeks of the year when things would be quiet so that every episode could be up in time for WGA and Academy voter consideration. And of course, the night before the Dead Girl screening, my wife told me she wasn't feeling so well. So, I finished up a piece I was writing, finished my research and questions for The Dead Girl, which I'd already seen, and really dug quite a bit, actually, because it reminded me of last year's 9 Lives, which I also dug quite a bit. The similarity here being that The Dead Girl is a series of about 5 short films presented as an anthology because they're all interconnected on the same subject of, you guessed it, The Dead Girl. Whereas 9 Lives is an anthology of 9 short films. You see the connection. Anyhow, I dig them both, and after finishing my questions and light research, I got into bed at 4 a.m., and of course, my wife had now woken up and said we should start gathering our things to go to the hospital, and in all honesty, she was already packed, and I thought I'd have a few weeks to pack still, so, thus, with no sleep, I sent off a slew of emails, putting my preemie plan into action, and after doing over 20 screenings in 2006, my screening series support team was ready to do one on their own. Good old Dave and Brian were already going to be there, and I let them know what the final numbers were for the house, got the VIP list, and they were ready to go. Thankfully, Gary Watson was going to be there to record our sound and did a great job as usual, so he was all set, and all that was missing was our moderator, and of course my suitcase for the hospital, but I took care of that kind of quickly. Enter journalist Jeremy Smith. Jeremy is a really down-to-earth, sharp guy who broke in as a journalist under the screen name Mr. Beeks while writing for Ain't It Cool News, and has since written for Collider.com, Variety, and yes, even Creative Screenwriting Magazine. In fact, Jeremy wrote the Dreamgirls cover story for a January-February 2007 issue. What I've always dug about Jeremy is that he's the type of film journalist whose knowledge goes back a bit further than, say, the last 5 years, or even 10 years for that matter. Jeremy's a smart guy, down-to-earth, versed in an array of film genres, and after I saw Jeremy moderate a screening of the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven with screenwriter William Monahan and director Ridley Scott, I knew he'd make a solid go-to guy should young Mr. Goldsmith arrive early. So I sent Jeremy my questions for The Dead Girl, along with some light research, because I knew he hadn't yet seen the movie, and I knew he would come up with his own questions too, but I wanted him to have something to start with. And from what I heard, the screening went off without a hitch, and as you'll hear, turned into another good Q&A. I really appreciate the team for shining so brightly, and for Jeremy being such a stand-up guy as to moderate the screening with basically less than 7 hours' notice. Of course, the one thing I forgot to tell Jeremy to do was to repeat the audience's questions so that you folks around the world could hear it, which is why you'll now hear me cutting into this episode to repeat the audience's questions, which were fed to me by Jeremy after he listened to a rough cut of the episode and told me what he thought those questions in all likelihood were. And I think he got them all right. So, The Dead Girl is a really interesting indie film, and I had completely looked forward to having the chance to interview writer-director Karen Moncrieff, and I hope to get another chance to do so in the future. But hey, a happy and healthy young baby and healthy and happy new mom were a fine trade-off, and I will fully admit to taking podcast breaks late at night in December to feed and diaper the little guy while sound mixing and still posting 2 episodes a week, making it all in all a completely sleepless but fun end to 2006. But now, without further ado, let's cut right to the stage after journalist Jeremy Smith introduced screenwriter-director Karen Moncrieff to talk about her new film, The Dead Girl.
Wow, thank you. This is the biggest crowd I've seen see this movie. That's pretty exciting.
I guess the best place to start usually is...
First of all, Jeremy just, I don't know if he told you, but he just jumped into the breach because the guy who was supposed to be doing the Q&A, his wife just went in labor, so that's pretty exciting.
That's right. And we haven't heard from Jeff yet, but, we're all...
So thanks for doing this.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much. So I guess, best place to start usually is how you got into this whole, breaking into this business. You began as a actress and did a lot of soap operas and some smaller films in the 80s and 90s. And
I did a lot of crap, yeah.
You worked.
I did.
And
I did. Well, no, I'm proud of that. I supported myself for about 10 years. My background is I had gone to Northwestern and studied theater there, thinking that I wanted to be an actor, basically because I didn't really know. I didn't know any directors or screenwriters, and I grew up in the Midwest, and it was sort of not a job that I really could conceptualize or imagine myself in. So, but I saw lots of women who were actresses, so I was like, okay, well, I'll do that. So I went to Northwestern and got a good, solid education in acting and theater and all that. And then came out and did a load of crap for about 10 years, some daytime soaps and some nighttime television that only your grandparents would watch, like Diagnosis Murder and Matlock, that sort of thing. I was the one who, the killer or something. And I was actually on a soap opera, and I think I was like 29 at the time, and my character was starting to go crazy and kill people, which is always a sure sign that you're about to get written off. And so, and I was already starting to hear from my agent, things like, a woman in her 30s, it's really tough. And I'm just thinking to myself, my God, I'm just getting started. I'm not, I'm washed up and I'm 29, And I also felt I had been really frustrated creatively by the stuff that I had been able to do as an actor, and felt all along like, hey, I'm capable of more than this. So I think I actually started writing. Well, I started writing at that point. I first took some extension classes at AFI and then UCLA, and started writing, I think, because I wanted to write something for myself, thinking, okay, I'll show them. I'll show them what I can do. And before I knew it, I liked the writing so much that I, that just felt really natural to me. Whereas, getting all made up and donning my high heels for auditions just really didn't feel like me, and I was never very good at dealing with the rejection. And while I liked the art of it, the business of it, it just didn't really mesh with me. But sitting alone in a room and imagining things felt really good and felt very sort of natural to me. So I started doing that, and before I knew it, I was writing things that weren't for me and writing things that I cared about so much. I wanted to hire better actors than I was, and then also because I had worked with also a slew of really bad directors, I didn't want anybody else interpreting what I'd written. So then I went to the low-budget film school in Los Angeles, LACC. And if you guys don't know about this, it's a really great resource in Los Angeles. It cost me $12 a unit to go through their 2-year program. And at the time, I was still doing a few. Did you have other questions? Because
actually, no, just one more, but this is working out. So,
all right, just like wind me up. So yeah, I've been in that room all by myself too long. So now I get out, and I'm really excited to talk. Anyway, I don't even know what I was saying, but you're so I went to LACC and I got a sort of a good education, good basic education in the technical side of filmmaking. And when I was there, I started writing my first feature script that I would show anyone, which became my first feature, Blue Car, and because it concerned. It was a coming-of-age story about a 16-year-old girl, and she has a relationship with her English teacher, and there's sexuality at the center of it. And I was really afraid that in the wrong hands, it would be turned into something that was exploitive, and I didn't want that to happen. Exploitive. I never know what the right one is. You guys are writers. Well, whatever, that word. So when I sent it to the only producer I knew at the time, I told him that, he said miraculously that he wanted to, put his money into it, his own money. Not a lot of it, but, he wanted to do that, and that was great. But I told him that I wouldn't sell it, that he had to take me, and so he did. And we ended up making that movie, and it went to Sundance, and nobody saw it. Miramax kind of buried it, unfortunately, but I was really, I was proud of it. It was my first thing. And then it was about 4 years until I made this.
But, Blue Car, while Miramax did bury it, people did see it. And it,
a few?
People know, and it's...
Oh, there you are. All 4 of you. Thank you.
It was one of those films that there was something about it. And when people sought it out, they were really happy they found it. And it has acquired, I think, a following. Especially, again, you've written some really nuanced characters there and gotten some great performances out of these, especially David Strathairn and Agnes Bruckner. As a first film, it was striking, and I think a lot of us were waiting for whenever the next one was going to come around. So, what was it that you learned on that first one, especially in the writing, that you were able to apply to Dead Girl?
Well, I learned that even though I thought that was a really svelte little screenplay I think it was 92 pages, I learned that I still overwrote. And I think this one was like 101, and still I ended up having to cut so much. I guess because I write pretty... it looks sparse on the page, but I guess in terms of movie moments, it's kind of dense. So maybe I didn't learn anything there because I still kind of wrote too much. I think most of what I learned with Blue Car, I learned a lot of filmmaking lessons about not compromising. Anything that you accept on the set, you're going to have to live with in the editing room. And I never regretted pushing people harder, or to go longer, or do another take, or get exactly the necklace that I wanted. But when I didn't do those things, then I always regretted that. So that's probably a big thing that I learned.
And in the interim, you did some TV work. You worked on 6 Feet Under and Touching Evil. Now, was that...
Touching Evil? You remember that one?
Well, I saw the 6
We
Feet Under.
referred to it at my house as touching a weevil.
But, again, here you're building up to, I suppose, the Dead Girl at this point. What...
Not exactly, honestly. It wasn't a straight trajectory. It was sort of like I'd made Blue Car, and people thought, oh, it's an interesting, small, personal movie. So now what? And I, in order to pay my mortgage, took some jobs, some writer for hire jobs, and found that experience, while while a lot of it was interesting, I wouldn't have taken the jobs if I didn't like the individual jobs. I was frustrated by the fact that at the end of the day, somebody else controlled whether or not we made the movie. And so out of extreme frustration, having finished several scripts that producers who had brought the idea to me initially, either a book or something like that, lost interest, I was sort of left going, well, my God, I'm not even sure I really, really care about any of these projects that I've done. And if I don't really, really care, then who's going to, So I went back to sort of the well for me and wrote a spec. And so The Dead Girl was that. And I went back to what always helps me feel really empowered, which is to write something that I know that I can do myself and do for a very, on a very small budget. And just practically speaking, a movie like this, you shoot each of the actors out in a week, basically. Our entire shooting schedule was 25 days. God, these are the most uncomfortable chairs. All the actors are done in a very short period of time, so you're not asking them to give up a whole slot, like their whole summer schedule or something like that. It's just a week of their life. And then, I tried to write parts that would allow actresses of varying ages really challenge themselves and do something that they weren't being offered by Hollywood, and thinking that was a way to get this made, and assuming that, like most of the other projects of mine, it would just take forever to get it off the ground. But oddly, and this has kind of been my experience so far, that when I stop worrying about what other people are going to like, what my manager's going to like, what my agent's going to be happy that I turn in, what the producers are going to like, when I just sort of shut out the world and start thinking about what I really want to write about, whether it's commercial or not, or whether I think anyone else is going to like it, oddly, people respond. So in this particular case, when I finished it, luckily my husband is also my producing partner, and he's a huge supporter of mine. So he was the first person I gave it to, and he understands where I'm coming from creatively, and he read it and said, well, this is the best thing you've ever done. We're making this movie. Then I gave it to my manager, and I think he was like, Jesus Christ, another really dark, hard, small indie, yippee, as my husband says, forgive me if your agents are managers, but that our managers and agents are parasites. And so the bigger you grow, the bigger they grow. I mean, literally parasites. So if you're not interested in growing really, really big and fat, then they don't get to get really, really big and fat. So my agents and managers and lawyers are not getting big and fat off of me. But so I gave it to him, and the response was less than stellar, and it kind of crushed me. And I realized that I had, been counting on his good response all along, because he'd been a long-time supporter of me since Blue Car. But we kind of just pushed past, that, and I had an agent who I think doesn't even read, and at the time, I have a different agent now. And so, he didn't know how dark and impossible it was, and he just sent it out, And in that first 10 submissions, I think, to financiers, because also at that point they were saying, well, you should attach a powerful producer, because this was my manager talking, because this is so dark, or you should get, I don't know, somebody else to sort of help elevate the project. And I'm just like, no, Eric and me, and we have a third producing partner, we're going to do it. And that, of course, even made him happier. But amazingly, in that first round of submissions, Henry Winterstern of it was then Glass Key, and he's since acquired First Look, said he would finance. So that was really, to me, it just validates that thing, that if you make work that you love, that somebody will respond. And it's not always been my experience that things happen as quickly as this movie happened, but sometimes it is interesting and kind of ironic that the things that you think will be most difficult actually aren't. And this movie came together, so quickly, and would have been even a quicker turnaround from script to screen, except that I was pregnant at the time and ended up having complications. So after he signed on to say, yes, I'm going to do this, I had to put the brakes on. And so we postponed for almost a year. And then we resumed this February. And now we started pre-production in February, and it's going to be in theaters December 29th. So that's a really fast turnaround.
Yeah. But going back to the idea, you said that people were kind of reluctant to get this going because of the dark tone. But also, I got to think that having a segmented storyline or having 5 segments might be something they're looking at like, what am I supposed to do with this? I think that people are just they're not used to someone kind of breaking out of that form and trying something different, especially when you have one film behind you. So how did sticking to your guns on that? What was
Nobody really asked me to change the structure of it until I had a cut, and then of course the producers were like, well, maybe we could intercut the stories. And I was like, no. Luckily the editor and I, the editor also backed me up on this. It's like, no, it's not going to work. So I didn't, the idea got tossed out there, but nobody really was pushing for that, luckily.
How do these segments come to you exactly?
Well, in a dream. No, different ways. I'm probably like, you guys are all writers, right? So you know what this is like. I'm a big sponge, and I absorb things from all over. I'd been taking notes on this idea about a community that's created by violent crime, and I had that on my desk for a long time, and that was just sort of sitting there. And then I was a juror on a murder trial, and the circumstances of the trial were not what this is, but there was something about that character, something about the victim, the young woman who was killed, that was really compelling to me. Or I should say something about the portrait that I started to piece together from bits and pieces that were offered by the various witnesses, and little snippets of things that were sort of uncovered during the trial. And I was fascinated by her because she was kind of a study in contrast. She was, like Krista in this movie, a drug-addicted prostitute, but she was also a really passionate mother and a loyal friend, and things that that were reported that she said. It seemed like she had a good sense of humor, and it all just after the trial was over, I guess I was left with this huge burden. We'd convicted the guy, but there was no redemption. There was no getting out from under the weight of the waste of her life. And so this is the second time this has been an impulse for me. Something, hearing about somebody's life, and that becomes a catalyst for me wanting to kind of save them in my work, even though I don't actually save her, obviously, wanting to make something redemptive out of a wasted life. So that, I guess, was part of where it came from. And then some of the wife character, for instance, she just grew up around some little snippet I had read about a wife of a serial killer who had dumped evidence in a landfill, and I was just thinking to myself, who must you be to be capable of that? And kind of worked backward, trying to imagine what that relationship was like and what that life was like. And there was another project that I had, I'd written a script about a forensic anthropologist that never saw the light of day. It was a spec, and it sucked, and so it's still in my closet. But I had done research into that, and so the second part, the sister, a lot of the research that I had done just sort of was still in me and living in me, and informed that segment. And the Arden section came from, she used to have her own full screenplay, actually. And when I was thinking about this idea of a community that's created around a crime, I was thinking, you always read about bodies being found, and I take long walks in Griffith Park, and I have a good imagination. So I'm always thinking, my God, what must it be like if you're the one who finds the body? So that started there.
And did you ever fall in love with any of the arcs, though, and figure, like, I could lug this out and make this like its own film?
Well, unfortunately, I kind of did with the first section, and I think the film and the screenplay suffer because of that. I loved it so much, it was twice as long as all the other sections. And this is another big thing that I learned, that the heavy lifting that you do not do in the script phase, and you leave it for the film, well, you'll be doing it then too, and you'll regret that you didn't work out whatever issues you have in your script. You will still have them with the film. And I loved the section, but it didn't feel... It was very much its own thing, and I also wanted to let it be its own thing in not trying to shove the movie or the screenplay into a little cookie cutter sort of model. But just when I finally pieced it all together as a film, the first section played, oh God, I think it was 40 minutes, and I did a lot of cutting, and so there's a lot of it that I loved that's no longer in the movie because it unbalanced the movie. So yeah, I kind of fell in love with the first section, I guess. And so now I think that there's a lot that's not there, a lot of really beautiful performance moments, and for me as a writer, things that make that section feel whole and satisfying that aren't really there, but I'm hoping there's enough that's there that you kind of get what that section's about and how it contributes to the whole, and doesn't make you, as hard as it is to sort of make the transitions from segment to segment in this movie, and I know that it is a bit of whoa, wait, what? It's not all about Toni Collette and Giovanni. We're switching gears. It was even harder when it was 40 minutes. Like 40 minutes into it, you're really like slapping your forehead going, what? Yeah. So yeah, that was, I sort of fell in love with that section.
Do you think like maybe on a DVD you might try and like...
Oh yeah, I hope so. I would love to, because it's really, I think, great stuff. Beautiful work by Tony.
Yeah, no, they're great. I guess one thing it's always good to talk about is process. Just basic nuts and bolts stuff about how many hours a day do you write, when during the day do you write, outlining, note cards, all that kind of stuff. I guess start off. When do you write during the day?
Well, this has changed for me since, as I mentioned, I had a baby. So I used to be. Well, I still am, left to my own devices, extremely kind of compulsive. And so when I'm writing and not doing much of anything else. And it's kind of hard for me to shake myself out of the little world that I'm creating. And so I, pre-baby, when I was drafting this, for instance, I could get up, often sort of wake up early and start writing and go all day, never take a shower or get out of my pajamas and, be still writing at, 2, 3 a.m., sleep a little bit, get up and do it again. So I'm, because also part of my process is to, this is when I'm drafting, and sometimes when I'm working on the first flush of a new idea, but I outline in great detail, usually my outlines will be 20 to 25 pages, and they're scene by scene, moment to moment, so that it just doesn't have dialogue, basically. By the time I finish an outline and know exactly what my story is start to finish. And then when I draft, I don't let myself overthink anything. I just execute the plan, and usually draft in 2 weeks or so. And then I revise. So after I finish drafting, I let it sit for a little while, as long as I can stand it. It's like Christmas, wanting to break it open and read it. And then I'm horrified, and then I, revise and, keep revising until I'm not horrified anymore. And then I also I have a circle of friends who I trust, to give me the real deal about things. And I will then give it to them and listen to what they have to say back and ask a lot of questions about what's functioning and what's not. Because also I usually find that in my first drafts, a lot of what I intended and what I think is on the page isn't really on the page. It's still in here, and only half of it's on the page. And so that sort of questioning of people who are trusted readers allows me to know what I've actually gotten on the page and what's still, sitting in my brain. And so it's just, I keep trying to put more and more of it on the page.
Sure. What about writer's block? Do you get it, and what do you do?
I haven't really had writer's block about. Okay, that's not entirely true. I'm not somebody who really procrastinates when it's my work and work that I love. Usually the problem more, especially now, is about finding enough time to do it. But I have had one project, something that I'm working on right now, that was one of those writer for hire jobs that I got hired to do before The Dead Girl. So I have owed the script for 2 years now, and I had a really lousy pregnancy, as I kind of mentioned. And aside from the more serious complications, I also had carpal tunnel syndrome, which is something like, who knew that was one of the things that you can get? But it was because I was so bloated. It was like, 200 pounds of bloated, and I was really, really uncomfortable. And so I couldn't write. And also I just felt nauseous all the time. So I couldn't write. And so I put this thing off. That after, when I first decided I wanted to do this thing, it was an adaptation of a book. It took like a year to negotiate the contract. So by the time I actually started writing, it was, long after that first, like, oh, I can't wait to do this. So now that's what I'm working on. And there have been times where I've just it's really worked to force myself to go to my computer and do it. And I guess what I do when I reach an impasse or I can't figure out what to do is I just tell myself to write the bad version of it. Just, let it suck, let it not be good, and just write it and get past it. And usually what will happen, it will suck, or it will kind of suck, but, eventually you find your way in that way. You find your way into something that won't suck or something that excites you again. And it just, you just want to keep the wheels moving, I think.
Let's go to some questions from the audience. Right there.
First question from the audience. Did your pregnancy impact the writing of the screenplay?
Yeah, it's pretty weird, actually. I ended up having a girl, and when I finished The Dead Girl, I was not pregnant and not even thinking I could get pregnant. So it was pretty weird. And then it happened a few months after that I got pregnant. And now I see all these connections, the mother and daughter theme over and over in here. And weirdly, also, we premiered the film at the AFI Film Fest on my daughter's 1-year birthday. And, I snuck into the theater as people were watching it. Just at the end to hear Brittany talking about her daughter's birthday. And I'm just like, so weird in some ways that, the things that the unconscious stuff that gets put out there. The script didn't actually change that much from the script. Again, it's one of those funny things. There are some scripts that you rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite for years. And this one, I started writing, I think August of 2004, started the outline, started drafting in October, and the draft that we got financing with was finished in March. So August, September, October, November, January, February, March. 7 months, I guess, from outline to and I'd probably done 3 drafts in that time. And then we postponed in June of that year and then picked up in February. And except for some cuts, the script was pretty much what it was when I finished it. So I didn't really rewrite as a mother, It's interesting. People have asked me, could I write the script now? I hope so. I don't know. I like to try and make myself as uncomfortable as possible while I'm writing, because I think, it's good to search around and find the stuff that stuff that really troubles you, really bothers you, and exercise it when you're writing.
Over there.
Next question from the audience was, what was your budget, and why was Piper Laurie so cruel and controlling towards Toni Collette?
The budget was $4 million, and this is part of what's left on the cutting room floor. I'm hoping now that you get the sense that these two women are sort of locked together by some shared secret, though I know you have no way of knowing what the secret is now. But the secret for you, because you sat through this screening, is that her father. There what had been a scene at the end with she and Giovanni when they're driving, and she tells him that that her father killed her brother and her mother helped cover it up. And so it was just a secret that they lived with all those years.
The next question from the audience started with a comment about how great the performances were in the film, and then they asked what was Karen's secret to achieving such great performances, and how important was it directorially to use so many close-ups?
Yeah, I like the face, don't I? I do. I like the human face. Well, since I used to be an actor, I guess I really love actors, and I know what a shitty job it is, and I know how hard it is to feel safe on a set and feel like you can reveal yourself in front of the camera while there's all this chaos going around. So I try as much as possible to allow my actors to feel me in there with them, and rather than, I remember as an actor having directors that would never communicate with you or give you any feedback, and you felt like you were absolutely out there on your own, on the high wire by yourself, no net. And I try to create an atmosphere where the actors feel like it's all play, it's all experimentation, and it's my job to help them get to what's needed for the screenplay. And if you're hiring good actors and you make them feel safe, then at the end of the day, it's up to you to learn enough about their process and how they work and how they feel comfortable to say whatever you need to say or not say, or create whatever you need to create, either by, whispering in the other actor's ear that they're working off of, or creating, things on set so that they can be brilliant, And then I think when you're getting stuff that's not what you need, instead of it being like, no, again, believe me, I've worked with those kinds of directors, like, again, and they don't tell you why, and you're just like, okay, and you just, get stuck. Instead, it's like, the attitude should be, okay, that was really interesting, let's try something else. So it all has a sense of play and experimentation, and then if they feel safe enough, they'll just, I think actors are really hungry to feel like creative collaborators, because so much, one of my favorite expressions when I was an actor, hearing like an AD call us meat puppets, So lovely, right? So, treating actors with respect and like collaborators, I think goes a long way to getting them to offer up their deepest stuff. And then also you find out a lot when you're first meeting with actors about what they're willing to do, and you just talk to them and you can see if they're emotionally connected to what you've written. You can see it.
The question was, were your actors attached before you got your film financing?
We got the financing first. Literally, the script was just finished. We sent it out for financing. We got that, and then once it was financed, we started going after actors, and Toni Collette was the first one to fall in. And having that first actor fall in, especially if it's an actor like Toni, who's kind of an actor magnet, because other actors like her, respect her work, want to work with, want to be in something that she's in. That's a big thing, having the first person fall in. I think it was Toni and then Giovanni.
Two more, I guess we have time for.
The audience question was, what led towards your decision of casting Kerry Washington in this role?
Well, originally the role was written for a Latina, and I fell in love with Kerry when she came in, and that's why she's doing an accent. And I just loved her, and there was a bit of a struggle because the producers didn't get it and didn't they'd hired her before and they liked her, but they didn't think that she went to Spence and they thought, oh, she's too upper crust, she can't get down and dirty enough to do this. But she came in and fought for this part, and man, this woman, I think she's so talented, and it was all there, in the audition, and we gave it to them, and they still said no, they didn't see it, because she'd come in sort of like when you first see her on screen with the wig and the makeup and stuff, and what they were looking for was that sort of, somebody who's really vulnerable and sympathetic. And I was just like, okay, you don't get it. It's makeup. You just take that off. And so, but Kerry and I conspired. And so I brought her back in and I said, okay, just leave the wig at home, no makeup, wife beater tea, just be really raw and real, and that was just undeniable. So even they could see that. And then when we shot, that scene with her and Marcia Gay, man, she was just giving it and giving it and giving it. So I think the world of her. She's also a really articulate, smart woman who can talk about the issues underlying this movie in a really beautiful way.
Les, right here.
Last question from the audience. If there was anything that you could go back and change about your film, what would it be?
It's funny. I have a lot of thoughts about if I were to do it over again, how I might make that. I sort of like this idea, and it's an idea, and maybe it doesn't fully work, of getting closer and closer to the dead girl. Like, so starting with a person who's most detached in a way and moving closer slowly. That's sort of that's an intellectualized idea, and I'm not sure if that fully, it helps you to make a movie that feels fully integrated. I think in some ways I now know that also the way I chose to shoot that first segment, because each segment was shot in a very different style, and you could sort of tell, and we allowed each segment had its own color palette and sort of approach to camera and all that. And I sort of feel like if I had it to do over again, I might not have chosen the same sort of very static, quiet approach with camera even. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that subliminally make you feel like it's really different from everything else. And I might try a different approach so that it didn't feel that way. But I don't know. I'm not somebody who, and I'm like this with my screenplays too, once something's done to me, it's kind of done, and I don't seek perfection in things. I know, I'm married to somebody who, was working on one screenplay for, 8 years, talking about searching for perfection. And I just don't, it's not something that I'm very interested in. I'm sort of interested in like, well, this is what I was thinking now. And this was what, this was me doing the best I could do to tell this story at the time, and now I want to tell another story. Do you know what I mean? So it's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for it, but I guess I just feel like, well, hopefully the movie works, and, whatever I wish I had done with it or wish I'd done differently, hopefully that just will be in, between me and my therapist.
Well, perfection's boring anyway.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's overrated.
No, it's messy, so much more interesting. But Karen, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks again to screenwriter-director Karen Moncrieff for coming down and spending time with us, and thanks to journalist Jeremy Smith for stepping in on such short notice. And that, folks, was the second-to-last official screening podcast from the 2006 season. The very last episode will be aired on January 26th and will feature writer-director Anthony Minghella talking about his new film, Breaking and Entering. This was recorded in November of 2006, and since Breaking and Entering only had a one-week December run in New York and LA, it was decided to broadcast this episode timed with the film's domestic release. As you know, January through March is a very slow time for a screening series, but this year, I've made sure we'll have some non-screening series Q&As scheduled, tons of random goodies ranging from a 1-hour-long Simon Kinberg one-on-one interview that I will probably split into 2 half-hour segments, and an even longer interview with horror writers Lee Winnell of Saw and Steven Susko of The Grudge. Of course, there's even more WGA Red Carpet video podcast interviews that I'll be posting with screenwriters responsible for the top 101 screenplays as voted on by the WGA, amongst other podcasts yet to be announced. Speaking of some of those unannounced podcasts, thanks to your kind tips into our virtual tip jar, I did manage to buy a field recorder that I'm going to bring with me to the 2007 Sundance Film Festival. I'm going to do as many random interviews as I can with folks in the street, filmmakers, film fans, Sundance staff, you name it. Your tips really do help out with everything from bandwidth, drive storage space, equipment, heck, batteries, and now the much-needed mics for this field kit. So, if you dig this podcast or a certain episode, feel free to drop a tip into our virtual tip jar at www.creativescreenwritingmagazine.blogspot.com. gmail.com. Just look for the PayPal icon at the top right corner, and thanks a ton to everyone who made it possible to buy this digital field recorder. Also, thanks for all the great emails coming in. I've set up a new address actually, so you can email me anytime at yo.goldsmith@gmail.com. So, the reason I had trouble responding to so many emails over the last 2 months, you now know my secret because I was busy painting the baby's room. Terribly, I might add, to the point that I had to call in some real painters. It was kind of me versus curved corners and angled ceiling, long story. But I am going to respond to each email sent in, so hang tight. I've also set up a new blog. A lot of people via email ask me a lot of different questions about what I think regarding other films, pop culture kind of stuff, etc. I'll admit it's a completely unoriginal name for a blog, but it's where I'm going to post to for a while. www.jeffgoldsmith.blogspot.com. Not much has been posted so far, but I promise to start putting stuff up soon, ranging from the occasional audio or video file or picture to brief film and DVD reviews of films that I dig watching and I think that you should look into watching as well. So take a look over there yonder from time to time, as I'll discuss plenty of filmic things that I think are worth sharing. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble till next week, because until then, I'll be on diaper duty.